Good morning, Dr. Lightbown. It's such a delight and pleasure to host you here on our campus at Sabancı University for our conference.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's such a pleasure to be here for my first visit to Turkey. Thank you.
It's our pleasure, actually. Your plenary talk this morning, entitled Transfer Appropriate Processing, How Can We Ensure That Classroom Learning is Transferable, has been highly inspiring and thought-provoking one. Could you a little bit elaborate on the transfer appropriate processing?
As the object of learning, we learn that, with luck we learn that, but we also learn something, we encode in our minds something of the situation in which we learned it, something of the environment, something of the way it felt or the way it looked, and we also encode with it the way we learned it, whether we learned it orally or in writing, whether we learned it in a communicative setting or in a form-focused setting. And so when we try to retrieve it later, the greater the similarity between the circumstances and the processes that were present when we learned it, the more successful we'll be at retrieving it.
One of the quotes that I'll put there from your research was something like, "The evidence is in, drills are out."
Yes,
so could you?
That's a controversial title from an article by Bill Van Patten and Winnie Wong, and a lot of people question that. I think maybe one of the slides I didn't have in this morning's talk would have been a good follow-up to that, which is that from Robert de Keyser, that drills are effective if you drill the right thing. And this goes back to the idea of transfer appropriate learning. If you drill something, let's say verb forms, and you drill it entirely in isolation, then retrieving it in a communicative setting is going to be difficult. If, on the other hand, you create a communicative setting where a particular language form comes up again and again, but comes up in an environment where it has meaningful use, then you might call that a drill, but because it's multiple opportunities to practice, but then the likelihood of retrieving it in a communicative setting is increased.
So in that respect, you were arguing that, you know, communicative interaction favors the encoding of some new knowledge?
Communicative interaction favors the encoding of some new knowledge. For example, in a situation where a word or a phrase is heard frequently or has very clear meaning, but there are some situations where new knowledge is hard to acquire in a communicative setting because you're so focused on the general meaning that you actually ignore a lot of what might be new learning because you can't handle it. It's too much information, so you just push it aside and go for the main meaning, and it actually can deprive you of opportunities to learn certain new things. So communicative interaction is good for learning high-frequency words and high-frequency phrases, things whose meaning is very clear in the environment, something that has high communicative value. But when it comes to grammatical markings or infrequent words or phrases that are a bit complex or that have a lot of non-salient bits in them, then a communicative environment can actually be a hard place to learn certain things.
Taking all this, you know, theoretical background into the classroom, what recommendations, what suggestions you have for the classrooms? How should teachers actually employ these in their teaching?
Well, in the simplest possible terms, the answer is that, and I sort of concluded with this today, that there are no activities that are inherently unmeaningful. Even something like a pattern practice drill may have a place in the classroom. It's just making sure that you find what that place is instead of making it take up all the classroom time or excluding it entirely from the classroom. So my advice for the classroom has to do with finding a balance of different kinds of activities so that students get maximum opportunities. And in the concurrent session that I'll be doing tomorrow afternoon, one of the things I want to talk about is the idea from Paul Nation, who is someone most people know of as from the vocabulary situation, vocabulary learning. He's talked about the 4 strands for learning, and he talked about it originally in terms of vocabulary learning, but I have found it a very useful way to look at classroom learning in general. So in that discussion tomorrow afternoon, we'll look at the four different elements, the four strands in his words, that need to be present in an instructional setting. And then need to be balanced in the instructional setting. And they include meaning-focused interaction and form-focused interaction, but I'll save the details for tomorrow afternoon.
Okay, we're looking forward to that session, actually. I have one more question related to your plenary this morning, which is based on content-based instruction. Actually, I even have taken a note somewhere here. Content-based instruction does not enhance language. I quoted from you this morning.
Well, I'm glad you told me that you wrote that down, because that's not what I said. But it's, you know, in certain circumstances that would be accurate. But what I actually quoted Meryl Swain, who said content-based instruction is not necessarily good language instruction, content-based language teaching. Content-based teaching is not necessarily good language teaching, by which she meant exactly what we were saying before, that when so much focus is on meaning, learners sometimes cannot also notice some features of the language. And of course, Meryl Swain's research was mainly in the context of French immersion, where students learn content in their second language and do very well on the content exams and are quite good at general comprehension questions, but they don't necessarily achieve good accuracy in language production, because they're focused so much on meaning that they kind of don't have time left over. And if the teachers focus entirely on the content, or primarily on the content, the students, even when the teachers think they're focusing on language, sometimes the students don't know they're focusing on language, because they've got so much invested in understanding the content.
There are a lot of language errors coming up related to grammar.
That's right. And teachers, as I say, have to choose their battles. You cannot do everything in the classroom, it's not at once, but then the learner can't do everything at once either. So it needs to be, we need to find a way of processing, of providing opportunities for different kinds of processing in the classroom.
That's right. Thank you very much. Actually, I don't know whether we have a couple more minutes, because having gone through, I mean, before you arrived on our campus, our university campus, I just started thinking, I have this and this and this to ask Patsy Lightbown. And one of the questions that I cannot help asking you now, you are known to give advice on program and policy departments to schools, of schools and government agencies and university foreign language departments. Could you tell us if you have an ideal foreign language policy and a program? This is such a big question, but have you got an ideal
for a country, for a school, for a classroom, for
a school?
For a school.
Yeah. Or an ideal classroom. Let's go to the classroom, because we are more classroom oriented.
Well, I think when I've talked with, when I talk about policies in the context of foreign language education, it most often has to do with policies related to the age at which instruction begins and the amount of time that's devoted to instruction. And those are two aspects of language learning that are highly politicized, and that often, where decisions are made that have to do more with political choices than with educational or research-related information that we have. So, for example, if parents are convinced that it's best to start foreign language instruction as early as possible, then it's very difficult for a school to say, according to the research, we have evidence to show that starting later, but providing a more intensive exposure to the language over a shorter period of time when students are older and have better study skills, metalinguistic awareness, L1 literacy, and all those things, even though the research suggests very strongly that that's a more effective way to provide second or foreign language instruction in a school, the decision is often made to to lower the age
Yeah.
of instruction because parents demand it, or because there's some misunderstanding, in fact, that an early start guarantees later success, and then the evidence is not there for that. So that's an example of a policy that is sometimes decided for reasons other than research evidence.
Thank you very much. Actually, that was one of my questions that I would ask: early age learning and
Yes.
foreign language, whether they should start at very early ages.
There are benefits to that, but the costs are also there, and in most school situations, the option is simply not there to provide the amount of instruction in the early years and the quality of instruction in the early years that would actually permit you to realize those benefits. So in the absence of that time and quality in the early years, it's better to focus the efforts in the later years from a research point of view.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed. Thank you.